and let them know two can play this game.
In the vast, frozen wilderness of Alaska, where the cold is a constant threat, one woman has become a global icon of toughness. She lives hundreds of miles from the nearest city and 197 miles north of the Arctic Circle, in a remote camp she calls home. To millions of viewers of the hit series Life Below Zero, she's Sue Aikens, the ultimate survivor. We've watched her hunt, outsmart predators, and face down nature's worst with a calm head and a dry sense of humor that just doesn't seem to fit her dangerous life. Her existence at the Kavik River Camp is a masterclass in survival, a look at a life lived on the absolute edge of what's possible. She seems unbreakable, a woman made of ice and will, but that strength, that incredible resilience, wasn't just born from a love of adventure. It was forged in the fire of a devastating tragedy, a secret buried deep in her past. The story of the Sue Aikens we see on TV doesn't start with a camera crew or a rifle. It starts with a little girl. Before she was a television star, she was a 12-year-old kid, fighting a kind of pain no child should ever know. We see her as the toughest woman on television, but the resilience she's famous for was built by a devastating secret, a story that starts with a 12-year-old girl, left all alone by her own mother in the middle of the Alaskan wilderness. This is the heartbreaking, untold story of how childhood loss created one of the toughest people on Earth. It's a story of pain so deep it could either shatter a person completely or build them into something indestructible. For Sue Aikens, it did both. And that first, defining tragedy was only the beginning of a life that would test her spirit again, and again, and again. To understand the woman who can stare down a grizzly bear, you have to understand the child who was left to face the world alone. Susan Aikens was born on July 1, 1963, not in the wild, but in the suburbs of Chicago, Illinois. Her early life was unstable. Her parents' marriage was rocky, and the family moved so often she never had a chance to put down roots. That chaos finally blew up when her parents divorced, an event that would change her life forever. In a move that's hard for most of us to even imagine, Sue's mother decided she needed a radical change. She packed up her things, took her young daughter, and moved from the lower 48 all the way to the wild frontier of Alaska. They ended up in a remote area about 50 miles north of Fairbanks, a place that was a different planet from everything Sue had ever known. For a young girl, it was completely disorienting. The familiar sounds of civilization were gone, replaced by the huge, intimidating silence of the wilderness, but the real test hadn't even started. Shortly after they got there, when Sue was just 12 years old, her mother made an unthinkable choice. She left. She just walked away, leaving her daughter completely alone to fend for herself in the massive, unforgiving Alaskan landscape. This wasn't some figure of speech, it was real. Suddenly, a 12-year-old girl was stranded. There were no neighbors, no phone to call for help, no one to turn to. There was only the endless, quiet wilderness and the terrifying knowledge that no one was coming to save her. Later in life, Sue has been protective of the details and doesn't blame her mother, who is now in her 80s. She said, "Something unique must have happened between my mother and my father for that situation to have evolved." In another interview, she put it this way, "If I haven't held anything against her that happened, I don't think the rest of the planet has that right. We don't get to go 4 decades later, and go backwards and say, 'You evil person.' That's not fair. That's cruelty. Is it the way that I would have scripted it? No, not as a child, but it takes everything that I went through to make me who I am, and I really like myself." That perspective says everything about her character, but it doesn't change the brutal reality of what she went through. Imagine the psychological toll. At an age when kids are supposed to be worried about school and friends, Sue was thrown into a primal fight to exist. The fear must have been constant, fear of the cold, of starving, of the things moving in the dark, and maybe the worst fear of all, being completely and utterly alone. The abandonment stole her childhood in a single moment. There was no time to be sad or feel sorry for herself. Survival was the only thing that mattered. Her world shrank to the absolute basics: find food, find shelter, and stay warm enough to see another day. This traumatic event became the fire that forged her famous self-reliance. It wasn't a lifestyle she chose, it was forced on her. The lesson was brutal and clear: you can only count on yourself. That painful truth, learned at such a young age, would become the guiding principle for the rest of her life. It explains the fierce independence we see on screen, the way she just instinctively knows how to solve any problem herself. Because from the age of 12, she never had another choice. The little girl who was left behind had to disappear, and in her place, a survivor had to be born. With her mother gone, the Alaskan wilderness became both Sue's prison and her teacher. Survival wasn't a concept, it was a brutal, daily test with life-or-death stakes. This was her new reality. Her education came from pure necessity and the occasional, gruff tip from the few other people living out in that vast, empty region. According to one story, a longtime Alaskan saw her desperate situation, handed her a rifle and some bullets, and gave her some harsh advice. "You better learn how to hunt, girl, or you're gonna die," he told her. That rifle became her lifeline. It was how she got food and how she protected herself. For a 12-year-old, learning to use a gun under that kind of pressure is an insane task, but for Sue, it was just one more impossible thing she had to do. She taught herself to hunt and track, learning the patterns of animals. She figured out which plants were safe to eat and which could kill you, through trial and error where one mistake could have been her last. She faced her first bear at 13, a scary preview of a much more brutal fight to come. In that moment, terrified but determined, she used her rifle to defend herself and survived. It was a critical lesson: in Alaska, you aren't the top of the food chain. If you hesitate, you die. Beyond hunting, she had to master living in the cold. She learned how to build a fire, insulate a shelter, and read the weather, which can turn deadly in an instant. Every single day was a battle to keep the cold out. The mental challenges were just as tough as the physical ones. The isolation was absolute. Days and weeks could go by without seeing another human being, with just the endless silence of the snow. That kind of solitude would have broken most people. But for Sue, it became part of who she was. She learned to live in her own head, to be her own best friend, her own source of strength. This period of intense loneliness built a deep inner core that you can still feel when you watch her on Life Below Zero, that comfortable silence, the way she seems completely at home in a place most of us would find terrifyingly empty. This wasn't just about getting by, it was about learning to thrive in a place that seemed designed to kill you. Every small win, a good hunt, a fire that burned all night, just surviving another day, built her confidence and sharpened her skills. She wasn't just learning to live in the wilderness, she was becoming part of it. The land that was the scene of her greatest trauma was also becoming the source of her greatest strength. The abandoned child was slowly and painfully rebuilding herself into the incredible survivalist the world would one day admire. The story of how Sue Aikens overcame being abandoned is just the first chapter of her unbelievable journey. If you're as fascinated by her story as we are, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the other parts of her life, where she faces down even greater challenges and proves over and over why she's a true icon of resilience. Just as Sue had learned to handle the unforgiving Alaskan landscape, she found out that the human heart can be just as unpredictable. Being abandoned as a kid left deep scars and made trust and relationships complicated for her. Over the years, she looked for love and companionship, only to be hit with one staggering loss after another. While she doesn't often talk about the details, she has been married 3 times, and each relationship ended in pain. Her first marriage was destroyed by a cruel twist of fate. Shortly after they were married, her husband was diagnosed with a brain tumor and died from cancer, leaving Sue a young widow. To go from being abandoned as a child to finding love only to have it ripped away by disease is a level of cruelty that's hard to wrap your head around. It just hammered home that brutal lesson from her childhood: the people you love can be taken from you without warning. Years later, Sue found love again. She married her second husband, Eddie James Aikens, in 1987. This would be her longest marriage, lasting 17 years and giving her 2 children, a son and a daughter. For a while, it looked like she might have finally found a lasting partnership. But the wilderness that was so much a part of Sue became a problem. Her husband couldn't adapt to the harsh life in Alaska. Sue even tried moving to Oregon with him to make it work. But she was a woman of the North, and he just wasn't. As Sue once explained it, her husband told her, "You know, I'm more John Wayne. You're more Grizzly Adams." They divorced in 2004, realizing they just couldn't be happy in the same world. Despite splitting up, they stayed close friends. In a heartbreaking tribute she wrote after he passed away, she remembered him saying, just 2 days before he died, "I love you, Mrs. Aikens." She added, "In friendship, we found the ability to say and do what we needed. I will so miss your sweet face and smile." His death in 2004 was another huge loss, the end of a major chapter of her life. A third marriage also ended in heartbreak, this time from betrayal. Sue found out her third husband was cheating on her. It was a different kind of abandonment, but one that hurt just as badly. It was another painful lesson that trust, once it's broken, can be impossible to fix. These cycles of love and loss would be enough to make anyone shut down for good. For Sue, a woman whose entire life was built on self-reliance, each heartbreak just confirmed the lesson she learned at 12, in the end, you're on your own. Her struggles in love weren't separate from her struggles in the wilderness, they were connected. Both taught her that survival, whether it's your body or your spirit, is something you do alone. Each heartbreak added another layer of armor, making her even tougher and shaping her into the fiercely independent person we see today. Of all the dangers in the Alaskan wilderness, nothing is more terrifying than the grizzly bear. For Sue Aikens, a run-in with one wasn't a question of if, but when. In 2007, long before the Life Below Zero cameras started filming, her life was nearly ended by a violent encounter that has become one of the most incredible survival stories you'll ever hear. It started quietly. Sue noticed a young male grizzly hanging around her Kavik River camp, burying its kills nearby. She knew this was a huge problem. The bear was using her helicopter landing pad as its personal pantry. One day, while she was pumping water from the river, she made a critical mistake. The pump took 2 hands, so for just a few moments, she set her rifle down. That's when the bear attacked. It shot out from a riverbank where it was hiding, moving with terrifying speed. The bear was hiding in a riverbank that I couldn't see, and he snatched me up, dragged me into the tundra, she recalled. This wasn't a normal defensive attack. Sue knew it was an alpha push, a young bear trying to show its dominance. In a split second, she decided to play docile, hoping to signal that she wasn't a threat. The bear mauled her brutally. It tore into her flesh, sinking its teeth into her skull and ripping at her shoulder. The attack was so violent it ripped her hip completely out of its socket. After what felt like forever, the bear dropped her and backed off, leaving her broken and bleeding on the frozen ground. Most people would have died right there. But Sue Aikens isn't most people. Anyone else would have prayed for a rescue. Sue, fueled by pure rage and the will to live, started to save herself. She knew the bear would be back, and she knew she couldn't let it live. In an act of unbelievable strength, she used her gun belt to strap her dislocated hip back into place. She then dragged her broken body back to her cabin, where she sewed up her own wounds, including the gashes on her head. Then, she did the unthinkable. She grabbed her rifle, went back outside, crossed the river, found the bear that had just tried to kill her, and shot it. She had to make sure the threat was gone. But her ordeal wasn't over. After dealing with the bear, her makeshift hip brace gave out, and her hip popped out again. She had to crawl back to her cabin in agonizing pain. She tried to radio for help but only got an answering machine. No one was coming. For 10 full days, she lay there alone, severely injured, fighting off infection and unimaginable pain. Finally, after 10 days, a pilot who had been trying to reach her saw her gear out in the snow and knew something was very wrong. Help had finally arrived. The bear attack was a brutal, life-changing event. But it was also the ultimate proof of the lessons her life had taught her. Abandoned as a child, she learned she had to save herself. Mauled by a bear and left for dead, she did it again. The incident cemented her legend, not as a victim of the wilderness, but as one of its toughest survivors, a woman who stared death in the face and refused to blink. After surviving abandonment, loss, and a bear attack, you'd think Sue Aikens had faced it all. But her next big fight wasn't against nature, it was against the very people who made her famous, the producers of Life Below Zero. This battle revealed a different kind of tragedy, the clash between a person's real life and the manufactured drama of reality TV. In 2017, Sue filed a lawsuit against the show's production company. The lawsuit claimed that the producers repeatedly and intentionally put her in dangerous situations just to get more dramatic footage, often against her own better judgment. The lawsuit listed several disturbing incidents. In one case, a producer allegedly demanded she film outside without a face mask in a -72-degree wind chill because, as he supposedly said, the audience needed to see her better. Sue suffered frostbite as a result. The most serious claim, however, was about a snow machine accident that was shown on TV. According to the lawsuit, producers pressured Sue to drive her snow machine across a dangerous frozen river, a route she knew was unsafe and had warned them about. She gave in, and the machine crashed, throwing her off and leaving her with serious injuries, including a broken collarbone. What her complaint alleges happened next is even more troubling. Instead of getting her immediate medical help, the production crew supposedly delayed her rescue so they could keep filming her in pain. The lawsuit claimed they chose to get shots of her suffering rather than call for a rescue flight, moving her on the back of another snow machine in the freezing cold because it made for better footage and was cheaper than a plane. She even claimed she was forced to walk part of the way to the rescue plane just so they could film how much pain she was in. The lawsuit pulled back the curtain on Life Below Zero, suggesting that some of the life-or-death situations weren't just the dangers of the wilderness, but were calculated risks manufactured for television. For fans, it was a shock. Sue's entire reputation was built on being real. The lawsuit alleged that this authenticity was being twisted and her safety was being risked for ratings. The final outcome of the lawsuit was never made public, likely ending in a private settlement, but the allegations themselves speak to a deep betrayal. This wasn't a fight against the cold or a predator. It was a fight for control over her own life and her own story. As the years went on, life kept testing Sue's spirit. While dealing with her TV career and the lawsuit, she faced another devastating personal tragedy. In an emotional episode of Life Below Zero, a shaken Sue revealed the death of her granddaughter. The family has kept the details private, but for a woman who had already lost so much, losing a grandchild was a particularly cruel blow. It was a wave of grief that reminded everyone that beneath that tough exterior is a grandmother mourning a life cut way too short. Despite all of it, Sue's story isn't about being a victim. It's about having an unbreakable spirit. She continues to run her Kavik River camp, proving her love for her solitary life in the wilderness that has both tested and defined her, and in a surprising and genuinely happy turn of events, after decades of heartbreak, Sue has found love again. She's in a long-distance relationship with a man named Michael Heinrich, an electrician from New York. Their relationship started online as a friendship and blossomed from there. They handle the thousands of miles between them by planning vacations and staying deeply connected. For a woman who has been so fiercely independent for so long, letting someone into her world is a huge step. It's a sign that even after all the pain, her heart is still open to trust and connection. From a 12-year-old girl left alone in the wild to a global symbol of survival, Sue Aikens' life is a story of extremes. It's a story of deep tragedy and incredible strength, of painful wounds and an even deeper well of resilience. The world sees the tough woman who can hunt, build, and thrive in a place that would break most people. But behind that image is a woman who has been shaped by a lifetime of loss, the loss of her childhood, her partners, and her granddaughter. Her story is a powerful example that the strongest people are often the ones who have been through the most. The hardships she faced weren't things that got in her way, they are the very things that made her who she is. Being abandoned taught her to rely on herself. The heartbreaks taught her emotional strength. The bear attack taught her the raw power of her own will to live. Today, Sue Aikens isn't a tragic figure. She is a symbol of the human ability to overcome anything. She took the pain of her past and used it as fuel, turning the deepest wounds into her greatest strengths. The heartbreaking tragedy of Sue Aikens isn't that she suffered, it's the incredible, inspiring story of everything she had to survive to become the unbreakable woman the world admires today. She is, and always will be, a true survivor.